Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney, alongside Nick Zararis. And Nick, it seems to me that the Edmonton Oilers have copied the Mavericks' homework, even word for word, even though the Mavericks said, hey, please make it look like you didn't copy.
Yes, but they also were due, whereas
Sure.
like Dallas kind of, other than the one run Luka made where they got it to like 7 in game 1, none of those games had been particularly close, whereas Edmonton, hadn't scored on a power play in the first 3 games. They had a grand total of 4 goals through 3 games. So they were due to some degree. We'll see about the Mavericks and Celtics tonight, tomorrow the Oilers. Over here in Rangers land, it's quiet. We're very much waiting for the actual season to end. They took care of Kakko last week. That's really the only news to report as of now. Makes sense. Either way, even if you want to trade him, he needs to be under contract to trade him. And having him at a reasonable number gives you options. You can never have enough options. That's largely been something.
Sure.
I would say the Rangers have struggled with at times over the last handful of years is they don't give themselves a lot of options as far as their roster, and having a cost-controlled guy who has the potential for some upside, Kakko coming off of last season, we all felt was poised to kind of make that next step to get from that 30-ish to 45-ish point. And obviously he missed a lot of time during the regular season. And when he played, even though him, Zibanejad, and Kreider had good results, they didn't put up the counting stats. So naturally, got him at a number that makes him palatable, and either you can use him in trying to upgrade somewhere else on your roster in a bigger package, or he's your second or third right wing, and he's going to be a solid impacts player. He's probably never going to be what you want from somebody you take second overall, but can he be 70% of Valeri Nichushkin? Maybe. And that at the number he's at, that's a solid starting point. And at the very least, they took care of some business, and now they got bigger fish to fry. They got to take care of Schneider and Lindgren.
Yeah, it was a 1 year, I think it was a $2.4 million deal. Yeah. And it's, listen, I tweeted this out when the news came out. This is fine.
Yeah.
You could do, first of all, you could do a lot worse than this. And second of all, the thing about Kaapo Kakko is absolutely we all want him to score a bunch of points. We all want him to be better offensively. He had kind of an unlucky regular season. He had some posts. He had some missed opportunities that could have helped him along the way in terms of just, putting those counting stats up that people read when they don't watch every game. But it's not, it's not ridiculous to say that we would have liked to see more out of Kakko offensively. But okay, even saying that, defensively is one of their better forwards. Like that Cooley, Wenberg, and Kakko line, that third line that they put together after the deadline was really good defensively. And you still need these guys on your roster because if you let Kaapo Kakko go, or if you trade him, or if you whatever, okay, I'm not necessarily opposed to that if you find the right deal, sure, okay, but you got to find somebody to replace him that plays defense as well as he does, and that's not easy when Kaapo Kakko is still in his early 20s and is only making $2.4 million next season. It's not like he's making 3, 4, 5 where, okay, there's a not just a want for him to deliver offensively. Now there's a need. And sure, we would all like him to score more, as I said, but he's still a very good defensive forward for what he is and what he's costing. So for now, no complaints.
As far as the one last thought on this before we move on and more general topics for today's episode, the one last thing is you mentioned it about the defense. That was the one line that was relatively comfortable playing cycle, playing high to low, and just getting zone time. And that's something the Rangers at large have struggled with a lot over the last handful of years is they're really only good at one style of play. And we've seen the teams that are successful are the teams that are good at both. And I know in the regular season, if you look at all 3 zones' transition stats, the Rangers grade out reasonably well as both a transition team, meaning off the rush, and as a cycle team. Then you get to the playoffs, a little bit less of the cycle game because those guys are playing less minutes. The top 5 forwards played a good 3-4 minutes more per game over the course of a playoff run than they did in the regular season. So that changes your results a little bit less cycle, a little bit more rush opportunity. And rush offense is just a little less sticky. I was talking about this the other day with somebody, and it's kind of the ethos, a formulative idea for this episode. The idea that if Edmonton, who has 2 of the 5 best players in the world, can't score on Florida, consistently living off of the rush and transition, what hope do the Rangers have with Mika Zibanejad and Artemi Panarin? If Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl can't do it, I don't think there's an argument that Zibanejad and Panarin are just going to magically figure it out. I think you need to find ways to be more adaptable. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, Florida won't be the same team next year. They're probably going to lose Reinhart or Montour, maybe both. They're going to have to change their calculus a little bit. And all of that is true. But you cannot just assume that's the only team you need to avoid. That's really the first point I want to start on is teams will improve from last year. This is not just the Rangers operating in a vacuum of how can we get the Rangers better? It's not just that. The Devils will probably be better next year. I could say a full season of Patrick Waugh Islanders, probably going to have better regular season results. I would say Carolina, it depends what they do. Pesce, Shea, Gensel, they have a lot of moving parts. Toronto may or may not be better. Boston may or may not be better, but just operating under the assumption that the only team the Rangers need to worry about is Florida, I think is a little misguided because, and again, and I want to add on to that, just because the Panthers are having a lot of success against the Oilers, I don't necessarily agree that the Rangers would have had as much success as Florida is, because what Florida's doing is not what the Rangers do. The Rangers are not a cycle team. They are not a strong forecheck team. When they play well, they forecheck well, but Florida cycles you into oblivion. Do you really want to think about what Connor McDavid skating at Jacob Trouba would look like for 6 games with the Stanley Cup on the line?
I'd rather not.
Do you want to see him skating at Eric Gustafsson for 6 games at a time? Ryan Lindgren, 1 knee of Adam Fox. So yes, I can understand a lot of the frustration Ranger fans are feeling right now, being that they feel Edmonton is inferior, that the Rangers wouldn't have been able to beat them. I would just say pump the brakes on that. I would say Florida plays a very unique to them style. The Hurricanes, if they had high-end talent, they're the Calgary Flames of a couple of years ago, but that puck actually goes in the net and they're not as reliant on Jacob Markstrom. They have got a formula that is very repeatable over and over again, and it's sticky. You can do that over and over and over again, and it translates pretty well. Whereas what the Rangers do, what Edmonton does, it's a little bit trickier if the other team isn't making mistakes, and that's the issue with rush offense. This has been a thing for years now. This isn't just a one playoff run issue. It's, can you play this way consistently? And this is your only path. We're going to talk about the Lightning of a couple of years ago in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the Capitals that won the Stanley Cup in 2018. Those teams had a little bit of variety in how they played. If the Rangers are going to close the gap between them and that next tier of team, they're going to need more than just creating off of the rush and special teams to be the difference. Well,
it all starts with the roster construction, because as we've talked about this before, I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation for the next 3-4 months. Is okay, well, this is the way that you've built the team, and this is like, I get it, 2 conference finals is nothing to sneeze at, but you get to those moments where you need a 5-on-5 goal and it just doesn't come. It just does not come. Chris Kreider had those heroics in game 6 against Carolina. If that doesn't happen, Carolina maybe wins that game, goes to game 7, and then all hell breaks loose. Thanks to Kreider for actually ending that series when it maybe should have been over before then, but that I digress. At the end of the day, the Rangers need 5-on-5 offense. Regardless of how you go to what means you go in order to get to that finish line of actually having forwards out there that can not only handle themselves at 5-on-5, but create chances at even strength that doesn't completely, disappear once they don't have the puck on their stick. Until you get guys that can do that for this offense, shrug. Like, this is the way that this team is built, where they rely on rush chances, they rely on other teams making mistakes. This is a very This is a team that's built on other things. They rely on the other team making mistakes in order to carry the puck through the neutral zone and get those roster opportunities or those stretch passes. They rely on the referees actually calling penalties to get those power plays. They rely on other factors in order to create, not all, but a good portion of their offense. Until you get players that can generate their own, then you won't change the DNA of this team. And that's one of the fundamental issues with this Rangers offense.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up what the depth chart's looking like right at this moment. This is entirely based on what they have at this exact moment. I don't assume they're going to change the lines the way they are on this chart. This is organizational depth. I don't know if Lafreniere is going to play with Zibanejad and Kreider. I don't know if Kakko is going to move up. I don't know if Brodzinski's going to play wing. I don't know if Rempe is going to be on the opening night roster. I don't know if Brendan Othman or Brett Berard are going to make the team out of camp. If one of them makes the team, who comes out? That's all to be figured out several months from now. This is what they're working with right at this exact moment. They have to figure out Lindgren. They have to figure out Schneider. They have $9.2 million. They signed Quick to an extension. They took care of backup goalie. So right now, you're looking at this. They very clearly need at least one right wing, if not two. Yeah. I don't think you can go into next season banking on Brodzinski maintaining a career year he had just by volume. You know, Brodzinski played the most games of his life in a single season at the NHL level last year. He's a nice story. I think he's a useful player. I don't think he's a top 9 player. I think on your fourth line, he's fine. I don't know if Rempe is an everyday guy. I don't know if he's more of a 30-something games and he gets in every now and then depending on opponent, home, that kind of thing. I don't know if Gaudreau is going to be here. I know that's been a topic of conversation because if they buy him out, they get a little bit of money back because of the way his contract is structured, and it would save them even more than just his initial cap hit. We all are kind of optimistic and wish casting Trouba off of this team, but it remains to be seen if that'll actually happen or not. So you're looking at this right now. You definitely need at least a 7th defenseman. You definitely need at least one wing, and you need to pay Lindgren and you need to pay Schneider, or you need to replace Lindgren or Schneider. I don't think Schneider's on the way. I don't think there's any way Schneider's on the way out. I think there's a world where they could maybe find something to make Lindgren work, and that would get them another $3-ish million to play with. But this team, you know, you're going to take steps. You're going to take steps in one direction or the other. And you look at this team and you look at the ages corresponding with these guys. You talk about Kreider is 32. Lafreniere is 22. That's nice. Kreider's 32. Zibanejad's 30. Panarin's 32. Trocheck is 30. Those are your 4 most important forwards. Lafreniere's 22. That's great. This team feels like they probably take a step back in the regular season just because of how much went right for them. Yeah. That's not necessarily the end of the world. You know, we talked about last week that if they win 5 less regular season games, it doesn't ultimately matter if they go on the long playoff run. Sure. But trying to find ways to improve the roster when they don't have a ton of space, it's going to be difficult. I don't think people realize how hard it's going to be to improve this roster just based on the money they have. They got to take care of Schneider and Lindgren. That alone is probably 6 of the $9 million, at least, if not 7 of the $9 million they're going to have to play with. And they would like to add another forward to this group. They definitely need to. I don't know if they actually will, but I know I read Peter Baugh's column and he mentioned Tyler Toffoli as somebody the Rangers were interested in at the deadline and could circle back around on. That's great. I think Tyler Toffoli's a good player. I don't think they're going to be able to get him at a number that's going to make all the math without subtracting from this group. Gaudreau can get you about $3.5 million. Trouba can get you $8 million. But if you get rid of Trouba, you're probably retaining as opposed to getting rid of all of that money. So the Rangers have options, but they're going to need to subtract. And I think that's one point I want to make here, because I've had a lot of people tell me, well, don't blow it up. Look at what Tampa Bay did. Look at what Washington did. I'm not saying they should get rid of Zibanejad or Kreider or Panarin or Trocheck or any of that. I'm saying that you look at this team and it's come up short a couple of times now, and you need to find ways to improve. You can if just by getting rid of some of the dead weight on this team, you can improve the roster just by subtraction. I'm not even saying who you bring in is going to be that much better. I'm saying that if you find a replacement for Gaudreau or for Trouba, you are going to dramatically improve your team's performance just based on results. You know, And I know Trouba's getting a lot of pushback from people who cover the team of, oh, well, he was hurt and the Rangers really value what he brings to the team. I want to reiterate, that's great. This is a salary cap league. You cannot tell me we're paying $8 million for leadership and penalty killing. I can find you a defenseman who can kill penalties for less than $8 million.
Right.
I'm sure there's another person on this team that's capable of being captain if it really came down to it. I need people to be realistic. That's the thing. I don't want to hear about Brady Tkachuk. I don't want to hear about Marcia Show. I don't want to hear about Alex Tuck. I don't want to hear about Steven Stamkos.
Yeah.
I don't really think Brett Pesci or Nikita Zadorov, like in a vacuum, each of those guys individually is a good player. Yeah. They would be better than what the Rangers currently have in their given spot. But you look at this roster and just sliding Brodzinski down a spot or putting Hedl on the wing up where Kakko is and sliding Kakko down to where Brodzinski is and Brodzinski down to where Rempe is. This team is not going to be as good as it was last year, barring another resurgence of, I don't think you can bank on Panarin being a 120-point player again. I think he'll be over a point per game, but he was one of the 5-10 best players in the league this year. I don't know how realistic it is to expect that to be an essential part of your team's recipe the way the Rangers kind of seem to think it is, because that seems to be the messaging from the Rangers, that we can get more from this group, so all we need to do is change what's on the periphery. I don't know how feasible it really is. What more are you expecting from Zibanejad, Panarin, Trocheck, Kreider? Lafreniere, Kakko? Sure. Hedl? Sure. Miller? Yeah, probably. Schneider? Yeah, probably. But how much more can you realistically squeeze from your main guys? That's what I disagree with.
Yeah, that the right wingers is the biggest red flag of I mean, obviously the blue line is not great, especially if they keep Lindgren, if they keep Trouba, if they keep the blue line essentially what it is now, and given all of their issues, keeping the blue line the same is going to be a problem for them moving forward. But that right wing line, or the four right wingers, just that's the biggest problem. Lafreniere is great, fine. That's all fine and dandy. Kakko is a third-line winger. Brodzinski is a fourth-line winger. And Rempe is an extra. So, okay, who's going to play your other top six right winger? Okay, well, even if Hedl does it, and you put Kreider, Zibanejad, and Hedl, and again, the argument against that is, well, you put Hedl on the first line in the playoffs and it didn't do anything. Okay, well, my man's came back from not playing for a year. What did you expect him to do? He had to sit out after playing because he was so sore he couldn't move. Like he gets the pass of all passes this playoff season. Like there were even then a couple of flashes where you thought, oh, if he scores here, I'm streaking across New York City. This is insane. I think an offseason where he's fully healthy, and you'll see a much better Filip Hedl than what we saw in the playoffs. So I'm not really concerned about him right now. But the flip side to that is, okay, well, if Hedl goes down again, now what? What is your solution? And hopefully that doesn't happen, and he has a long and healthy career. But we cannot ignore his concussion history. So, okay, if Hedl goes down again, if he gets hit and he's out for who knows, then now you have the same exact issue that you had this season, where you had that gaping hole in your top six right winger spot, and you filled it with guys off the street, essentially just trying to fill that hole come playoff, come the deadline. And come the deadline, what did you do? You traded for the safe pick that didn't fit in that spot where you. Again, we're not in the room with Drury, so how feasible these bigger deals were is anybody's guess. But at the same time, you didn't go for these big ticket trades. You didn't trade for Gensel, however feasible that is, we don't know. You didn't trade for insert other big name player here. You didn't want to empty the cupboards, which again we talked about last week. Which there's pros and cons to that. But you didn't do any of that, and you traded for Roslovic who didn't fit. And then you spent the entire playoffs trying to fix the problem that you had in October. So if Hedl goes down, you have the same issue again. So the Rangers really need to figure out a way to clear out some money, which I would have to imagine they do, because they see the same depth chart that we do. We're staring at it, and I'm sure Drury's staring at the same thing. He sees that the right wing spot is a massive red flag, and defense aside, that's really where, if they are serious about winning, that has to be their biggest priority.
And one thing I do want to add, if you want to argue that Othman or Berard is going to get into this team, sure, I could see a vision where they are on the team next year. I would not consider them a serious candidate for second line right wing, just based on the way the Rangers have handled young guys in the past. And I think GMs care about this, the fact that teams basically don't win the Stanley Cups with rookies in the top on the roster. Like, most Stanley Cup winners over the last 5-10 years have one or two, if that, and they value experience. So even if you want to make the argument that those guys can be better than what they've had, sure, I could see a world where Berard comes in and is useful as the third line right wing right away, or the fourth line right wing, or Othman slides in and he's useful. I can see that for sure. The Rangers need to find ways to elongate their lineup. That was definitely an issue the longer the playoffs went on. It was very clear Laviolette did not feel great about that third line, even though they had good metrics. They weren't putting the puck in the net, and they were struggling at times. I know once they put Roslovic down there, it really kind of fell apart because he didn't fit what they wanted to do, but they had to keep him in the lineup because of what they did to trade for him. So now I want to change the topic of conversation slightly, pivoting towards something I've been told more than once. I have had a handful of people tell me, well, Tampa Bay didn't blow it up after they got swept in the first round, and the Capitals didn't blow it up after they lost to Pittsburgh in 2017 on the way to the Penguins going back-to-back. This is where I want to start. I'm going to change slides here. This is the starting point. I personally don't think we should be comparing anybody to the Lightning for a few reasons. I mean, you look at the talent we're talking about here: Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman, not mentioning Vasilevsky, not mentioning Braden Point, not mentioning Ryan McDonough. That's just a better group.
Yeah.
Second of all, on top of that, we do all remember that we've spent the last 4 years bitching about long-term injured reserve manipulation, correct? That Tampa Bay had a roster that was like $100 million when they beat the Canadiens in the Stanley Cup final. You cannot realistically compare where the Rangers are at in their window to where Tampa Bay was in 2019, especially because you got to look at the ages. Kucherov was only 26 in 2019, and he already had a Hart Trophy at that point. He won a Hart Trophy in 2019, the year they got swept, but he had a Hart Trophy. Nobody on the Rangers has won a Hart Trophy. Nobody on the Rangers has a 50-goal season. Yes, Fox and Hedman both have one Norris, but you go further down. Ryan McDonough was getting down-ballot Norris votes as a Ranger. The Rangers don't have anybody else in their group who's getting down-ballot Norris votes. Tampa Bay also had the benefit of Braden Point and Anthony Cirelli and Sergachev all on entry-level contracts at the same time. The Rangers' only entry-level contracts on the team last year are Matt Rempe and Will Cooley. You know, we're talking about very different impacts, and I don't think Tampa Bay should be a frame of reference for anything. That is undoubtedly one of, if not the best teams of the salary cap era, because they put it together perfectly.
It's really funny how the discourse has gone from, oh my God, the Lightning are abusing LTIR and injecting $20 million into their team because of a loophole, and now the discourse is, oh, well, the Rangers are just fine because look at the Lightning. It's like, wait a minute, hold on a second. You can't have your cake and eat it too, unless Chris Drury wants to go the LTIR.
And the Rangers have had chances. The Rangers the last 2 years have had chances to do it.
They've had so many chances to do it, and Chris Drury refuses to do it. So at that point, it's on Drury for not doing it. If everybody else is doing it and it's legal, and you choose to not do it because of reasons, that's on you, big dog. That's not on anybody else. The Lightning wanted to do it. They chose to do it. They got away with doing it, and they got cups because of it. The Rangers don't want to do it, or I don't know. Like, I don't know what the reasoning behind that is, but they're not doing it. So comparing these two teams is impossible, because you have one team that wants to go over the cap to make the team as best as they can, and you have one team that doesn't want to do that. So comparing apples to a bed sheet is not going to do you much good.
I don't think I think people are too optimistic. Like the person I was having this conversation with said, well, Tampa Bay didn't have 4 Hall of Famers when they won their first Stanley Cup. They had to win the Stanley Cups. I think, again, we're being very charitable with interpretations comparing the Rangers to Tampa Bay. Sure. Could Adam Fox get there one day? Yeah. Could Shesterkin get there one day? Sure. Is anyone else? Panarin, maybe. And the funniest part was the person said, well, all the Rangers got to do is win a couple cups, and then they've got 4 Hall of Famers.
Yeah, sure.
A couple. Just a couple.
Yeah. I mean, how about you turn on your console, turn on NHL 24, win your Stanley Cups, and then you can have that conversation within your BGM mode. But this is reality here. So let's dial it back a little bit here and then reapproach reality with a different lens, shall we?
All right, so I'm toggling up something here. This is Hockey Reference. This is the 2018-19 team that got swept in the first round by the Blue Jackets. Kucherov, Stamkos, Point, Hedman, Gord, Tyler Johnson, all on the Cup teams. JT Miller, traded after this season. Where's the other one? Ryan Callahan is on here. He leaves the team after the season. Anton Strawman leaves the team after this season. And where's our friend Dan Girardi? He's on here too. He also leaves the team.
Number 20.
Yeah. He also leaves the team after that season. Who do they replace those guys with? Blake Coleman, Barclay Goodrow. That's who replaces the forwards. Kevin Shattenkirk comes in, and he replaces Dan Girardi. And Zach Bogosian comes in, and he replaces Anton Strawman. That's the difference here. Don't tell me Tampa Bay did not change things. They gave JT Miller a long-term contract and very quickly realized, okay, this is not going to work. We need to find something else here. We need a different look for our second-line center. That ultimately became Braden Point. They took a gamble on one of their young guys and said, okay, you are capable of doing this. And they changed their team very quickly on the fly. You know, Cirelli took a big leap in that 2-year window where they went back-to-back. Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov had a combined 100-something points 70-something points over the 2 playoff runs. The Rangers don't have anybody of that caliber. You have to accept that if the Rangers are going to get where we want them to, they're going to have to change guys. They're going to have to trade. You know, Girardi doesn't play a ton on that team, but 1748, you know, you turn those Girardi minutes into Kevin Shattenkirk minutes, and Kevin Shattenkirk is getting paid 1/4 of what Dan Girardi is. That becomes a lot more doable. Anton Strawman wasn't bad in the 20 minutes he played, but Zach Bogosian was better. You have to find ways to improve your roster, and I understand having emotional attachments to guys. I do. But if you want to compare, relatively speaking, here, I got to switch tabs. If you want to compare, relatively speaking, guys on the Rangers, you got to accept that they're going to need to guys you like are going to have to be on the chopping block. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You go down and you see Gustafsson at the 17-minute mark. Is that the Dan Girardi spot? Is Schneider the Girardi spot? But you see how aggressively much more aggressive the minute splits are. You know, Schneider's only at 15 minutes. Zach Jones was only at 14 minutes in the games he was playing. You got to consider the Rangers formula is very difficult. And if you are unwilling to change your guys, and you're not going to be able to change the guys at the top, you know, we've kind of beat that drum all summer. You're not getting rid of Panarin. You're not getting rid of Zibanejad, Kreider, or Trocheck. You're not getting rid of any of those guys, even if you could. You could get rid of some of the guys who are causing problems for you lower in the lineup, but you do have to replace them. And that's been the one counterpoint. I still have to do my research. I still have to start looking at reclamation projects. I have to start looking at restricted free agents who might be available in a trade. But right now, if you are unwilling to trade out, you know, a Lindgren, a Trouba, a Kakko, a Hedel maybe, somewhere in the lineup for the purposes of improving, you're not being serious about winning. You're just not. You can say, I love this guy, I want him on the team. Okay. Then we're having 2 different conversations.
Yeah.
If you want guys on the team for specific reasons, that's great. But ultimately, we're trying to win a Stanley Cup here. We are trying to win a Stanley Cup here, and the window is not getting bigger.
Emotional attachments don't get your Stanley Cups. I'm sorry, you know, some people don't want to acknowledge that or believe that that is true. Emotional attachments do not win you Stanley Cups. And I'm not here to say that you have to throw all emotions out the window at all times. These are still human beings with relationships, and it's the locker room is still important, etc. But at the end of the day, all that matters is how you play on the ice. And you said this a couple of days ago on Twitter, where there's a market of defensemen who aren't good at anything, but somehow they carve out careers based on their traits. And I quote tweeted and I said, he's he's a big gritty defenseman. Every team wants in their locker room type of assessments. Right. These are the type of assessments that are just word salads, because it tells you nothing. When somebody says that, whether it be about a defenseman, a forward, what have you, that means that they are not good on the ice. And why do I say that? Because if they were good on the ice, the first things that would leave that person's mouth is, oh, they're good at X, Y, and Z on the ice. But when they're not, the person will default into, oh, this is a locker room guy. This is somebody that is well-liked around the league. That's all fine and dandy. Can they play well? Game 7 of a conference final, can they play well? Game 5 of round 2, can they play well? I don't care if if their barbecue has 75 people from the NHL. I don't care. Can they play well? Can they play above expectation? Can they play even marginally better than their opponent when it matters? Come the important moments of the season. That's the only thing that GMs should be looking at. Now, of course, they don't, but that's what fans should be thinking about as well. Is okay, we can love Dan Girardi, we can love Ryan Lindgren, we can love Matt Rempe, we can love these guys and wish them well in their careers, but are these guys going to help this team win the Stanley Cup? Is their play, take everything else out of the equation, can their play help this team win the Stanley Cup? If the answer is no, I love you. I'll send you Christmas cards, but I don't want you on this team anymore. Like that should be the number one way of objectively looking at a player, and are they a good fit on your roster? And again, relationships matter and friendships matter and all these things, but you don't win Stanley Cups based on friendship. I'm sorry. You just don't. You don't get to the cup final hoisting above your helmet with everybody wearing friendship bracelets. Like, that's not how these things happen. This is not how championships are won. Friendship bracelets are they're great. They're fine. But that's you can't put 18 bracelets on the ice and expect to win a Stanley Cup. You need to win based on, is this the best team? And then you go from there.
I think you can start worrying about that type of stuff, the intangibles, the chemistry, leadership, that type of stuff. Once you've reached a certain threshold of talent, sure, you could say Tampa Bay, prior to the development of that Gord, Gaudreau, Coleman line, they lacked a certain physicality. They lacked a certain ability to play a high to low cycle, which, as we've talked about in regards to Florida, is a little bit more sticky. It allows them to play less defense so that when they do play defense, the minutes they play are more effective because they're playing less overall defense. And then the other example is Washington. And Washington is a little bit closer to where the Rangers are, where it's 2 or 3 really high-end guys, and then a quality group of depth. Braden Holtby, fringe top 5 goalie most of his prime. Backstrom, one of the best centers of his era. Ovechkin, the best goal scorer ever. But you go further down, John Carlson, you take Fox over Carlson every day of the week. That's not a discussion. Can K'Andre Miller be as good as Dmitry Orlov? Because Orlov was the second most used defenseman on that Stanley Cup winning team. Can he do that? I think K'Andre Miller can get to that threshold. I also think the problem is, and this is indicative of me, this isn't just hockey people, I think we are too caught up in trying to look what's worked in the past and not finding ways to get better in the present, because all we have is the historical record. I can't tell you what's going to happen down the road. You can point to teams and say, well, they didn't blow it up. Why did it work for them? I think we have to acknowledge also that those teams are operating in a different NHL. I think the fact that the salary cap is going to go up for the first time in a while at more than just $1 million, I think that's going to help the Rangers. I think, like we talked about last week, I think the Rangers are waiting to see if any of the real big fish around the league are eventually going to become available, whether that's Draisaitl next summer or McDavid 2 summers from now. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kreider, Trouba, and Panarin all expire the same summer Connor McDavid can become a free agent. I will also say the Edmonton Oilers hired Connor McDavid's agent to be the president of the team, and they hired his junior hockey coach to be the coach of the team. I think they are going to take care of Draisaitl, and I think they are going to say, Connor, whatever it takes, we will get this done for you. And I don't think that's a real consideration. I don't think the Rangers should be putting their eggs in the basket of this player may become available. Because
again, it boils down to the team building the roster the same way of we're going to rely on outside factors to get us the win. Why are you relying on other people to get you to be successful? Shouldn't you be the one to be proactive instead of reactive? Shouldn't you be the proactive team that is looking to be successful on their own, building the foundation and getting people to want to come here, as opposed to begging and hoping big name guys to come? You did this 20 years ago with the whole leaks and the Lindrosses and all these things. Where did that get you? You're okay. So what you're telling me is that you learned nothing from that experience. If they re-sign Lindgren to a massive deal, then you've learned nothing from the Dan Girardi experience, and you're essentially just repeating history at that point.
The one last thing I want to touch on in terms of comparing the Rangers roster to other recent championship winners, and why I would argue the Rangers probably aren't as close as we all feel they might be, is that they're paying pretty much sticker price for everything. They don't have, Cirelli on an ELC. They don't have Braden Point on an ELC. Vasilevsky was only making $3 million when they won the first Stanley Cup. The Rangers don't really have a ton of excess value contracts. Panarin over market value, Zibanejad was slightly over market value, Fox was over market value, Trocheck was over value. But we need more than that. It can't just be 5 or 6 guys. You go look at that Tampa Bay team. 10 of their 12 forwards are excess value of their cap hit, 4 of their 6 defensemen, their starting goalie. And that's not to say the Rangers couldn't, be the Blues or the Capitals. I mentioned those teams in the long thing I wrote 2 weeks ago as, yes, there are always outliers. There are always teams that are able to buck trends, buck conventions. But look at where the league is going. Look at the last few Stanley Cup winners. Look at why they have been able to win. Look at who they've beaten on the way to get there and what they've done. I know everybody's saying, oh, the Rangers just need their Matthew Tkachuk for Mackenzie Weegar and Huberdeau trade. That requires a star player becoming available that wants to leave, that wants to come here. And the Rangers don't have a Jonathan Huberdeau and a Mackenzie Weegar to trade.
And again, it relies on other people's mistakes.
Yes.
It repeats the same process of, let's just wait until somebody makes a mistake and then we can pounce on it. But that doesn't solve the core issue.
Yes.
It's still the same fundamental DNA that this team is built off of, and we talked about this when Patrick Kane was traded to the Rangers. This is a team that looked at past results as opposed to what you can do for me now. And I feel like the Rangers really need to look at themselves in the mirror and say, okay, all of these things are what happened in the past with the Panthers winning, probably winning. I mean, who's to say? But and past like up winners, like that's how their formula to getting to where they did is great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work in 2025. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is, yes, to a certain extent, formulas are a little bit different than individual player success, and you can glean some things off of some past successful rosters and kind of build a formula based on that. But you can't put all your eggs in one basket and say, oh, this is how they won. Oh, we're going to do the same thing and we're going to win. That's not how that works. You have to be proactive and say, okay, this worked this year. We can pull X, Y, and Z off of their formula and change it around, inject it into our formula, and see how that goes, as opposed to swinging the pendulum one way or the other, because that's not how you win.
The Rangers are really in that difficult spot because they need to improve on what they already had, and it took a lot going right for them to get what they had. Shesterkin had a really good regular season after February. They had career years from Trocheck, Panarin, and Lafreniere.
Quick was sensational as
Quick
well.
was great in his starts. We talked about back in December that if Quick gave them 10 regular season wins, that would be a success. I think he had 17 regular season wins, something like that. It takes shit like your backup goalie playing that well if you're going to go and win a President's Trophy. I don't know how realistic a lot of the expectations are. I struggle to think they will be in that echelon in the regular season. Could they go on another run in the playoffs? Sure. That's different. Those are two different things, and they require two different things. I think the fact that the Rangers have had such a long, sustained period of regular season success, sans the 3 years post-letter, they think they're not that far away. They think just tinkering on the edges, eventually they'll find the right wing to play with Zibanejad and Kreider, and that'll get them going. And they have all these young guys they feel pretty good about who will be cheaper, who will give them more financial flexibility into the not so distant future. But I do think people should start to taper their expectations about how long this window of contention is really open. They're going to be a solid regular season team next year. They'll make the playoffs, but once they get there, will they have addressed the fundamental issues? We had the depth chart up on the screen for a good 10 minutes. They still haven't found a first-line right wing in 3.5 seasons now. They've auditioned more than 20 different guys in that spot in that window. Until they do that, until they figure out if Miller can be a first-pair left defenseman or not, there are internal things they should have tried at some point in the last 3 years that they just haven't. And because of that, we're reaching that sensitive inflection point now. The window is not closed, but it's definitely more closed than it is open. Their core is old. At some point in the next 2 seasons, this is going to shift from being Zibanejad, Kreider, Trocheck, Panarin's team to being Fox, Miller, Lafreniere, Schneider. I'm assuming Shesterkin will get taken care of. And once it's their team, I don't know what that ceiling looks like. I don't think it will be as good as it's been the last few years. Of course, they're going to have more cap space and things can change. All it takes is one free agent. All it takes is one trade and you're a very different team. But as you've been reiterating, that's requiring outside sources. That's requiring something that's not in your control. And at some point, the Rangers are going to need to take an authoritative stance on, we need to improve. How are we going to do that? As opposed to, okay, we got to maintain what we have and then get better. It should just be, let's get better. I don't understand the reticence to not improve. Last year they couldn't give Gaudreau away. Widely reported, they tried, but they didn't want to have to give draft picks as a sweetener because they had to do that the previous summer and it cost them 2 seconds to get rid of Nemeth. Now, you have an opportunity to right some wrongs, to get some flexibility, and then really do some surgery. I don't think you're going to really invigorate the fan base if your big solution is we're going to do Max Pacioretty as this year's Blake Wheeler or Tyler Toffoli. Would Marchessault be exciting? Yeah, sure. Would Stamkos be exciting? Yeah, sure. Those guys don't address the fundamental issues of the team. They are talented individuals, but they don't necessarily complement what the Rangers want to do. And until the Rangers figure out where they want to go, we're going to be in this holding pattern. We've avoided talking about the rumors, the free agents, that stuff, because we genuinely don't know. Until they take care of Schneider and Lindgren, until they figure out what they're doing with Trouba and Gaudreau, it's not really worth talking about free agents because they don't have the money for any of them.
If you're a student in a class, whatever insert class here, doesn't matter what it is. Let's say, because your grade is dependent on multiple different things. It's not just one. It's not like you hand in one homework assignment and then there's your grade for the year. You're graded on the homework. You're graded on any projects, tests, all these things. You can hand in every homework and have 100 out of 100 for that, right? You can do well in these group projects and have a great grade for that too. Until you've studied for these tests, you're not going to have a good overall grade. You can do the homework. You can copy off people's homework, which is what teams like to do when other teams win the Stanley Cup, right? They like to copy their answers, try to see if they can pass by off of someone else's work. They can do well on the group projects, the chemistry, the intangibles, the locker room guys, all these things. But if they don't study for the test, they will fail. That's what this comes down to. If you don't study, if you don't get prepared.
See, but Andrew, they point at the regular season where they pull shit out of their ass all regular season and say, oh, we're fine. And that's the thing. They will always look at the big sample of the regular season as a validation of their vision. They want to win low event games with elite goaltending and elite special teams. Because they won 55 games in the regular season, you're never going to be able to convince them that they're actually not that close. They're always going to say, well, we're going to take the long-range sample over the short sample. And that's the issue. That's what
here's the thing. Well, okay, fine. Well, if they can't convince themselves, then next year at this same time, guess what we'll be talking about?
The same thing.
The exact same thing.
Oh, I think it's more likely that we're sitting here having this conversation at the end of the first round or the second round, and we're reaching a point where last year Panarin, last year of Kreider, last year of Trouba, if Trouba's still here, and they still haven't addressed their fundamental issues because they are entirely dependent on too little of their team.
Yep.
Until they elongate their lineup, until they have more consistent defensive pairs, until they have more diversity of style of play throughout their lineup, they're going to always run into a team that's bigger and badder than them. Without the superstar trump card, they have wilted. There's a reason they can beat Carolina when push comes to shove. There's a reason they couldn't beat Tampa Bay, whether 2015 or 2022. And there's a reason they couldn't beat Florida this year, why they couldn't beat the Devils last year. The other team stars were better. Nico Hischier bodied Zibanejad last year in the first round. This year, same deal. The Devils will be back. They will get a better defense. Whether or not they fix their goaltending remains to be seen, but they will be back.
They'll get somebody.
They'll get
Markstrom, Saros, Allmark. The options are there.
They will have an opportunity to improve, and then that's another team you got to worry about whose stars, frankly, are probably better than yours. You know, if Jack Hughes is healthy, they've got a nice group there. The Rangers are at a weird point now. I don't know if there's an obvious solution here because they don't have a lot of flexibility. You know, that's what we started the conversation with. So I think it makes sense to circle back around and finish up there. They don't have a lot of breathing room. You know, they got $9 million. They got to take care of Schneider, Lindgren. They need at least one wing, and they need at least a seventh defenseman.
Two,
if not,
preferably
two, but they definitely need at least one. They need at minimum a seventh defenseman if they don't feel comfortable with Jones penciling in for the Gustafsson spot right off the bat.
And I think the key to there, and you'll wrap up here in a second, but I think one of the ways to really understand where this team sees Zach Jones specifically is who they sign as a replacement to Eric Gustafsson. Because if they sign Kevin Shattenkirk, for example, that tells you everything you need to know about how they view Zach Jones. Because in theory, Zach Jones can also move the puck the same way, but he's probably at this point maybe more reliable and not as much of a coin flip from game to game, from shift to shift as Eric Gustafsson, which is why he probably won't resign here. And the idea is that Zach Jones will be the replacement. But if they sign somebody to replace Eric Gustafsson, that tells you a lot about how they view Zach Jones.
Agreed, 100%. You know, Gustafsson was a Laviolette thing. He played with him last year in Washington, had a really nice season, and they weren't 100% on Jones, so that makes sense. We'll see if they opt for a seventh defenseman or somebody to compete with Zach Jones for that spot. We'll see if Othman and Berard can crack the top 12 and make the roster on opening night. We'll see if Rempe can crack the roster on opening night. We will see if Hedl is going to transition to wing or stay as third-line center, because you could argue moving him to wing might help, but then you need to address the third-line center role, which, you know, not necessarily easy either. But that will just about do it for this week's edition of the Liberty Blue Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed. Wherever you get your podcast, please be so kind. Throw the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, subscribe, alarm bell, get a notification whenever new episodes go live. Let us know in the comments, what do you want to see the roster surgery look like? Who's in? Who's out? We'll talk to you guys real soon. Until then.